former prisoners, what's prison really like compared to what they show on television? I'm a correction officer. The other day there were 6 guys standing in a group making a ton of noise in the corner of the yard, and I walked over to see what was happening. One was laying on the floor gagging and throwing up as all the other inmates were laughing hysterically. They saw my concern and one held his hand up and said, "My wife sent me those jelly beans that have awful flavors like toothpaste and earwax. He just ate one we think was vomit." It's not always fights and murders. Sometimes it's just guys messing around having a good time. Not prison but jail. For the most part everyone is pretty chill. As long as you follow the rules no one will bother you. The one thing I did notice is no matter how chill people are, things will rapidly decay into a racial situation. And if you're not on the right side, if you're white, then you side with the other whites. If you're black then you side with the other blacks etc. Things will become a bit more difficult for you. Case in point, I was eating lunch during free roam with a friend I made who was black. I was in there for traffic violations. He was in there for simple battery. First time being in jail for both of us. So we didn't really care about the politics of others. Well, a racial argument formed, and like the Red Sea, all of the races split up into their own groups. We however didn't, and stayed sitting by each other, cause you know, we were eating. Nothing is going to disturb our dinner. Later on we're both told that, if something like the racial fight ever happens again, that for our own safety, we should go to our own races. Thankfully I was released after 3 months, and didn't have to deal with any other racial fights. I had a buddy who was in for about 3 years for marriage fraud. He said there are a lot less fighting than he thought. Turns out people just want to do their time and leave. Fighting adds time to your sentence, so they generally avoid it. He was in low security though initially, moved to medium after a fight. Ironic, so maybe it's worse in prisons with more lifers. USA, the food tastes great. You hear prison food is horrible but no really, it's horrible. Place smelled like dog poop when I got in. It was weird, not that it stinks, but that it isn't sweat and bathroom smell. Now that's dog poop smell. I'm a purveyor of cheap food. I've gone to great lengths to see how cheap I can find food I deem eatable. I've eaten the cheapest garbage that dollar stores refuse to sell cooked in the worst ways possible because it can't go to waste. Nothing I've ever eaten rates lower than everything I ever ate in prison. It defies everything your brain and body know about food and is the first step in the process to break your mind down from human being to less than animal. Smells like dog poop because the nutritional quality is the equivalent of bottom dollar dry dog food and basic cleaning and sanitization products aren't available. Even if you're a nice clean person and for some technicality the guards will treat you like a dog in a cage they are paid to watch that does funny things sometimes. If they let you out the door free and innocent, you're on your own. Bus stop is 4 miles away. You need a cab. Oh, phone's inside. No, you can't come back in. Bye. Prisons are like exactly what kids describe the horrors of school life as, but with no teachers and the staff isn't instructed to teach you. They're instructed to punish you without torturing you. And it's 24 hours a day. Everything is concrete, no sunlight, and basically no objects or stimulus anywhere. 60 Days In is probably the best version I've seen, but there is so much downtime and most of the time people are trying to make time pass. Everyone is always trying to set up relationships on the outside. Something I learned was if nobody in your cell knows who you are, and you know you're there short term, just lie about what you do, but don't be an idiot. That is, if you work at Target say you work at Walmart or just say you don't do anything. You don't know who to trust. When you leave everyone wants your stuff. I worked in a prison, in the office, not as a co. It was minimum security, with about half the offenders completing what's called a state jail sentence of 2 years. We were offered free lunch, but it was the same as the inmates. Surprisingly, most of the time the food was actually pretty good. Very high calorie though. Someone told me that was so that if there was an issue and the kitchen had to be shut down for a while, inmates would have their caloric needs met for the day. I have no idea if that's true though. We had trustees that would work in the front office with us. They weren't behind any kind of gate. They would clean around the office. The ones I met were always very nice and respectful, and people in the office were nice and respectful in return. The job wasn't super hard. From what I saw, it was probably pretty boring dusting stuff they'd dusted the day before, cleaning the same bathroom over and over again. In training, they make you believe you should be wary all the time and would tell the women things like, if you get taken as a hostage, they will hurt you, and things like that. I'm sure that's more of an issue at units with very violent offenders. Mine did have violent offenders, plenty of them, but things were generally very routine. Of course, there was a ton I never saw, because I was usually in just a few areas of the unit, and not really interacting with offenders, except to say thank you, and things like that. Horrible, terrible people become normalized when you spend years with them. I've caught myself many times thinking he's a pretty good guy about inmates only to later find out what they did. One of the good guys was in for stabbing his 3-year-old daughter to death. Through the neck and head. Divorce going bad. Nobody gets the child sort of thing. The worst part for me is even after knowing what they did, still treating them too kindly. Basic things like genuinely asking how they are doing. Being polite and respectful. Then the thought of their victim pops up in my head, and I picture myself there, as the crime is happening, and snapping back to how I'm currently interacting with them like nothing is wrong. As though what the victim went through doesn't matter to anyone anymore. Almost like I'm betraying them. It does not feel great. June of 2007 is involved in a single vehicle DUI accident which resulted in the death of my passenger and friend. As a result, I was sentenced to 141 months in the Oregon prison system. Reading through all the comments, it's painfully obvious other than a few nobody did any real time. In some ways it's much worse than TV, in some ways it's much better. Nobody speaks of the incredible amount of loss and waste our prison systems create. And I'm not talking about recycling. No, I'm talking about the psychological and emotional damage done on both sides by the situations created by the system's design itself. However, I will leave with this, and those I saw some of the most powerful and moving displays of human compassion and kindness, and on the other side I saw some of the most despicable, disgusting acts and human degradation, and they weren't all just a beatdown. I had a brief stint for a non-violent non-property crime. I also had work release, so that was nice. But for me, it was like a stricter indoor summer camp. I was housed with like 200 inmates in my dorm. There were like 5 people to avoid, but besides 4, that it was kind of nice. The conditions and food weren't great, but I was with basically good people who were also there for non-violent non-property crimes. We'd play games, I got a lot of reading done, and had great talks. One great memory I have is when like 5 of us took the cheese slices off our sandwiches and made a game of standing a bunk and a half away from the wall, whipping our cheese slice at the wall, and whoever slice stuck the longest one. Former correctional officer here. The biggest issue on both sides is boredom, but I was happy to take that over an interesting night. A lot less paperwork. My first night on the job, I was braced for the worst. As I passed by one of the tables in the day room, an inmate stopped me and asked if I played bridge. When I said no, he replied, "Damn, we needed a 4th." Never trusted any of them, of course, but that was the first clue that maybe it wasn't like the movies. Those documentaries you see on TV, they film for weeks, sometimes months, in the most notorious prisons they can find, just to get enough footage for a 1-hour episode, and a lot of that hour is people talking about the 2 minutes of footage they showed. I never could get my wife to understand that. She was always afraid for me at work. After my OJT period, I was assigned to the maximum security / punitive segregation unit. Theoretically the worst offenders. Even there, I might have 5 minutes of interesting in a week at most. I was required to rotate out for a week every couple of months to give me a break from the high risk assignment. I always wondered why nothing went on in the hole either. In my 5 years of working there, other than a psychotic inmate we had that required special handling due to his immediately attacking anyone who opened the door, I was involved in a grand total of 4 physical altercations, most of which were simply putting an end to something as it started. Nothing like the movies at all. To call it an altercation is stretching the definition. I would say, in the prison I worked in at least, that 90% of the issues we had were the direct result of boredom in one way or another, on both the inmate or an officer's part. To be honest, some prisons are hellholes, I'm told, though I can't speak to them as I never worked there. Not prison, but short period of time in jail while waiting to transfer to rehab. First time was a city jail that sucked. Random inmate threatened me, so I was held in classification the entire time. Basically spent 2 weeks detoxing, talking, drawing, Food sucked but the girls on my block were nice. Second time was in a country jail. Better food. Overcrowded. Didn't even have a cell. Just overflow room with bunks. It was nice to not be locked in my room. The girls were catty and annoying. I just stuck to myself and waited for transfer to rehab. Second time did the trick. 6 years clean on 5 over 31 and no plans to try jail a third time. I did 8 months in a woman's state jail and the most surprising part was how caring and supportive the women are. We were placed in pods of around 50 women, and in every pod I was transferred to there was always a motherly figure who took care of the weak/ill/new inmates. Of course there were always a few troublemakers, but for the most part all the women wanted the best for each other and celebrated milestones like schooling and upcoming releases together. The guards were atrocious and left us mostly to fend for ourselves. They were too busy having relationships with the most vulnerable inmates. The jail I was in was actually shut down a few months after my release for numerous infractions. The final straw was they put a woman complaining of stomach pains in solitary and had a doctor tell her she was just constipated. She was actually 24 weeks pregnant and had the baby alone in the toilet of her cell. I'm a little torn over my experience. It was over 10 years ago. I'm a recovering alcoholic and got in some trouble with the law, got a few too many tickets, and had to spend 60 days in jail. So my experience wasn't like hardcore prison or anything, but it was still pretty bad. You get there, and you're in this initial holding area, where you stay there for anywhere from 24 hours to a week depending on how many available beds they have. In that room, you're in this gymnasium type area with bunk beds with all these other people who are also just now being processed. People up at night sobbing. Drug addicts going through withdrawals pooping themselves. Literally, you're basically just waiting to see where they take you next. You don't get anything except for your inmate clothes, sheets, a towel, and a bar of soap. If you want a toothbrush, deodorant, shampoo, toothpaste, lotion, a brush, anything, you have to get it from commissary, and it can take weeks. If you have a nice cellmate, sometimes they share. Breakfast is as early as they feel like it. I was woken up for breakfast at 4 AM one day. The food is terrible. Powdered milk. Only thing that tasted good was this cinnamon bread they gave you. Sometimes when people were too depressed to eat, they'd give it away, and so you got extra. Lunch/dinner. You get whatever they feel like giving you. They would always throw in Kool-Aid packets. And still to this day the smell of Kool-Aid makes me sick. They gave us books. We had a whole cart we could choose from. I think I read 8 books while I was there because there wasn't much else to do. I did a lot of fitness stuff in my cell. I had a daily routine. Lost about 20 pounds while I was in there. You get a decent amount of time out with the other inmates. If you want to play cards, you better know how to play spades, because that's all they play. Most inmates I were with were actually really decent people struggling through some sort of addiction they got arrested for. I once had a group of 8 inmates sitting together. Everyone was giggling like a little kid while I taught them how to do origami. Pure childlike joy in such a dark and ugly place. The officers hated me for it. Don't take food to your bunk from mealtime. I got put on 24-hour lockdown for sneaking cookies into my bunk. Lol. Shady things happens behind the scenes. An officer had gotten released from duty for getting an inmate pregnant right before I got there. Getting letters from people is one of the only things that gets you through all of the bullsh. If you have a family member in jail, write them a letter. It'll make their whole week. If you really want to make them smile, throw a few bucks in their commissary account. People come and go pretty often, but sometimes you can make friends. It was always a little sad hearing someone getting released at midnight. It was always midnight and waiting until breakfast to see who was gone. But then when I finally got released, it was the best feeling ever. All I wanted was a bacon cheeseburger, a Dr. Pepper, a hot shower, and a comfortable bed. It's really just the little things that remind you you're free. Still to this day, sometimes I look around and have to remind myself that I'm absolutely thriving compared to the girl I was back then.